Now let's start with the defensive line. And similar to yesterday's podcast, when we were actually talking about the offensive line, we have not yet done on this podcast a defensive line full preview podcast. And trust me, there will be a full defensive line preview podcast at some point this offseason before we get into Tennessee week later in August. With that being said, we will go over some of the defensive line key battles to monitor, but I'm not going to sit here and burn through all the material of a defensive line podcast. Sound good? Also, the beauty of the defensive line is we can sit here and say, this is a key battle here and there, and there are key battles, and we don't necessarily know who's going to be a starter. But pretty much everyone plays. The defensive line rotates for practically every team. Yeah, you're going to have some players play more than others, but they rotate throughout the game. You don't really see defensive linemen on the field 100% of the time. That just doesn't usually happen. Let's go with defensive tackle, and then we'll go to defensive end. Now, Syracuse brought in two, I think, pretty significant pieces at defensive tackle in the transfer portal. They got George Rooks from Boston College, and they got Chris Thomas from Marshall. Syracuse also lost Murad Watson in the transfer portal, which in my opinion is a pretty significant loss. I mean, he was a freshman All-American. I think we all would have loved to have Murad Watson back, but you know what? Texas decided to tamper, paid him a ton of money. More power to Murad Watson for leaving. I get it. I'm not mad at Murad Watson. Blame the system, if anything, for him leaving. But regardless, that's my salt for you all. Syracuse also returned a number of decent players. They got Deion Tank Wilson back. They got Rashard Perry back. And they also got Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff back. Between these five players of George Rooks, Chris Thomas, Deion Tank Wilson, Rashard Perry, and Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff, only two can start along Syracuse's interior defensive line. And if I had to guess for now, I would say it's Deion Wilson and Chris Thomas will start. But most of the players that I just mentioned have starting experience. In fact, 4 of the 5 players have starting experience. Let's start with Tank Wilson. Last year, I believe he started the first 4 games for Syracuse. Unfortunately, he got injured, but he did return for the bowl game, and he started the bowl game. I'm not going to sit here and say that Deion Tank Wilson is a lock to be a starter along Syracuse's defensive line, but I think it's highly probable that he starts for 2025. Then you got Chris Thomas. Last year, he appeared in 13 games for Marshall, and he made 42 tackles and 3.5 tackles for loss. He did not apparently start in any of those games, but he definitely got significant playing time over at Marshall. George Rooks. He started 11 games at Boston College last season. Boston College is an ACC team. In fact, if you want to flip George Rooks and Chris Thomas, I'm all ears. I certainly think that is realistic. Rashard Perry. He started 4 games for Syracuse football last season, and then he got Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff. He's probably the least likely of those 5 to at least begin the year in the starting lineup, but he did start a game in 2022, and since then, he's been a rotational player along Syracuse's defensive line. So you got 5 defensive linemen on the interior. There are 2 spots, both of which are obviously the starting spots, up for grabs, and we'll see how it all shakes out. Again, my guess, Deion Tank Wilson and Chris Thomas will be the 2 starters, but hey, agree or disagree with me? Comment in the comment section below your thoughts on Syracuse's interior defensive line. Let's go to defensive end now. I think one guy is pretty likely to start. In fact, I might put him in the quote-unquote safe category, even though under Fran Brown, no one is technically safe in their job. But David Reese, the Cal transfer, he's got a ton of experience on the edge. I think it's his 8th year of college football. Over the past 2 seasons, he has 11 sacks combined. So 11 sacks over the past 2 seasons, playing for a power conference team, transferring to Syracuse this offseason. I think it's safe to say that, at least to begin the year, David Reese is going to be a starter. So I don't think there's much of a competition there. But then there's 3 other players for one open spot. You got Dennis Jaquez, Kevin Jeopardy, and David Omaperiola. 3 guys, 1 spot. Who is it going to be? Comment your thoughts in the comment section below right now. All of them have a case. Dennis Jaquez started 5 games last year and had 2.5 sacks. Kevin Jeopardy started the first 5 games of last season, but then missed the rest of the year with an injury. And then David Omaperiola appeared in 12 games and started 1 for Syracuse a year ago. And he was just a redshirt freshman last year. So he's pretty intriguing, not just for 2025, but also the future as a pass rusher for Syracuse football. But my best guess for the defensive line to start the year, as far as the starters, at one defensive end, you got David Reese. Then on the interior, Dion Wilson and Chris Thomas. And then the other defensive end, I'm going to go with David O.